The review was brutal. James Brown has no real voice, just screams and grunts hiding behind a good band. The critic, David Morrison, thought he'd written an honest assessment. He had no idea that 2 weeks later, Brown would pull him out of the audience, hand him a microphone, and say, "Show me how it's supposed to be done." What happened next humiliated Morrison, until Brown did something that changed his entire career. It was March 1967, and David Morrison was 28 years old, working as a music critic for the Village Voice in New York City. He'd studied music theory at Juilliard, spent years analyzing compositions, and considered himself an authority on what constituted good singing. He could identify a perfect pitch, critique vibrato technique, and spot a flat note from a mile away. In his mind, being a music critic meant having standards, and those standards were rooted in classical training and technical precision. When his editor assigned him to review James Brown's upcoming show at the Apollo Theatre, Morrison wasn't particularly excited. He knew Brown's reputation, the hardest working man in show business, the godfather of soul, all those dramatic titles. But Morrison had heard Brown's records, and to his classically trained ear, they sounded unimpressive. The singing was raw, unpolished, more shouting than actual vocalization. Sure, the energy was there, but energy wasn't technique. Passion wasn't skill. Morrison attended the show with his notebook ready, sitting in the middle section with a skeptical expression that never quite left his face. When Brown took the stage, the Apollo erupted in screams and applause. Morrison watched with the detached eye of someone analyzing a specimen rather than experiencing art. Brown performed with his usual explosive energy, the splits, the spins, the dramatic cape routine. The audience was on their feet, losing their minds, completely transported. Morrison took notes. Excessive movement, compensating for vocal limitations, screaming rather than singing, grunts and yelps instead of melodic phrasing, technically incompetent, but energetic. After the show, Morrison went back to his apartment and wrote his review. It was published 3 days later under the headline, "The Emperor's New Voice: Why James Brown's Popularity Exceeds His Ability." The review read, "In part, James Brown has built an empire on a fundamental deception that passion can substitute for talent. While his band is undeniably skilled and his stage presence is energetic, Brown himself has no real voice to speak of. What the audience mistakes for soul is actually just screams and grunts hiding behind competent musicianship. Brown cannot sustain a note, his pitch wanders, and his phrasing lacks any sophisticated understanding of melody. He is not a singer, he is a dancer who shouts over talented musicians. The adulation he receives says more about declining standards in popular music than it does about his actual ability." Morrison was proud of the review. It was honest, technically accurate, and he'd backed up every assertion with specific examples. He expected some pushback. Brown's fans were passionate, but he stood by his professional assessment. What he didn't expect was the phone call. 2 days after the review published, Morrison's editor called him into her office. "James Brown's people contacted us," she said. Morrison felt a flutter of anxiety. "Are they threatening to sue?" "No. They're inviting you to his next show at the Apollo, front row seat, guest of Mr. Brown himself." Morrison was confused. Why would he do that? His editor smiled. "Maybe he wants to prove you wrong, or maybe he wants to prove you right. Either way, you're going." "I don't have to go. I already saw the show. David, one of the biggest stars in music, is personally inviting you to be his guest. You're going, and you're writing about whatever happens." The following Saturday, Morrison showed up at the Apollo Theatre to find a front-row seat reserved in his name. The other audience members eyed him curiously. A white guy in a suit and tie at a James Brown show, sitting alone in the best seat in the house. Morrison felt distinctly uncomfortable. The show started with the usual explosive energy. Brown was in rare form, the crowd was ecstatic, and Morrison sat with his arms crossed, mentally cataloguing technical deficiencies just like he had the week before. Then, about 40 minutes into the show, something unusual happened. Brown stopped mid-song. He walked to the edge of the stage and looked directly at Morrison. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brown said into the microphone, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet theatre, "we have a special guest with us tonight, Mr. David Morrison from The Village Voice. He wrote a review of my show last week." Morrison felt every eye in the Apollo turn toward him. His mouth went dry. "Mr. Morrison wrote that I can't really sing," Brown continued. "He said I just scream and grunt. He said I'm hiding behind my talented band. He said I have no real voice." The crowd's mood shifted. People were booing now, shouting at Morrison. Someone threw a wadded-up piece of paper that hit him in the shoulder. Now, Brown said, calming the crowd. "Mr. Morrison is entitled to his opinion. He studied music at Juilliard. He understands technique. He knows what real singing is supposed to sound like." Brown paused. "So I thought, why don't we give Mr. Morrison a chance to show us? Morrison, would you please come up on stage?" Morrison's blood turned to ice. "No, I am fine here, thank you." "Oh, I insist," Brown said. And his tone made it clear this wasn't really a request. "You said I can't sing. I'd like you to demonstrate what proper singing sounds like. Come on up here." The crowd was chanting now, "Morrison, Morrison." Morrison had no choice. On shaking legs, he made his way to the stage. Brown extended a hand and pulled him up. The stage lights were blinding. Morrison had never felt so exposed in his life. Brown handed him a microphone. "What's your favorite song, Mr. Morrison?" Morrison's mind went blank. I. Come on now. You must have a favorite. Something you think showcases real singing, real technique, not screaming and grunting like I do." The crowd laughed, but it wasn't friendly laughter. Morrison's throat was completely dry. I can't sing. I'm a critic, not a performer." "Exactly," Brown said quietly. So only Morrison could hear. But then he spoke into his microphone so everyone could hear. "Mr. Morrison says he can't sing, but he can tell me I can't sing. Interesting, isn't it?" The crowd erupted in applause and laughter. Morrison felt his face burning. "Mr. Brown, I was simply providing a technical analysis based on what?" Brown interrupted. "Based on your Juilliard education, based on your understanding of classical technique." Brown turned to address the audience. "See, Mr. Morrison here thinks singing is about hitting perfect notes and proper phrasing. And you know what? He's not completely wrong. That is one kind of singing." Brown turned back to Morrison. "But there's another kind of singing, Mr. Morrison. There's singing that comes from here." He tapped his chest. "Singing that's about communicating feeling, not demonstrating technique. Singing that's about connecting with the people in front of you, making them feel something real." Morrison stood there, holding the microphone, feeling smaller by the second. "Tell me something, Mr. Morrison. When you were sitting in this audience last week, taking your notes, analyzing my pitch and phrasing, did you feel anything? Did anything I did make you feel something in your chest, in your gut?" Morrison wanted to lie, but something in Brown's eyes made him tell the truth. "No," he said quietly. "No," Brown repeated. Because you were too busy analyzing to actually experience. You were measuring my technique instead of letting the music reach you. Brown took the microphone back. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Morrison is not a bad person. He's just confused about what music is supposed to do. Brown gestured for Morrison to sit on a stool that had been brought out. Stay up here. I want you to see something. Really see it, this time. What happened next? Morrison would remember for the rest of his life. Brown performed "It's a Man's World," standing just a few feet from Morrison. But this time, he didn't perform it for the audience. He performed it for Morrison. Direct eye contact. Every word, every raw emotion, every crack in his voice delivered straight to the critic who'd said he couldn't sing. Morrison had heard this song on the radio. He dismissed it as technically unsophisticated. But hearing it like this, inches away from Brown's face, seeing the tears in Brown's eyes as he sang about loneliness and loss, Morrison felt something crack open inside him. Brown's voice did crack. His pitch did waver. He did grunt and scream and let his voice break in ways that would horrify a classical vocal coach. But Morrison finally understood. That was the point. Brown was singing about pain, and pain isn't pretty. Pain doesn't hit perfect notes. Pain cracks and breaks and screams. By the time the song ended, Morrison was crying, not polite tears, full body-shaking sobs. He didn't even know why. The song had reached something in him that had been locked away, some grief or loneliness he'd been too sophisticated to acknowledge. The Apollo was silent. Then slowly, the applause built until it was deafening. Brown helped Morrison to his feet and spoke directly to him, not into the microphone. You felt that, didn't you? Morrison could only nod, unable to speak. That's what singing is for, Mr. Morrison. Not to demonstrate technical proficiency, to make people feel, to reach into their chest and touch something real. You can't measure that with music theory. Brown addressed the audience again. Mr. Morrison is going to write another review of my show, and I hope this time he'll write about what he felt, instead of what he analyzed. Morrison left the Apollo Theater that night. A different person. He went home and sat at his typewriter for 3 hours, deleting and rewriting, trying to find words for what he'd experienced. His second review ran the following week, under the headline, "I was wrong about James Brown, a critic's apology." It began, 2 weeks ago I wrote that James Brown couldn't sing. I was technically correct and profoundly wrong. I measured his pitch, critiqued his phrasing, and completely missed the point. James Brown doesn't sing to demonstrate vocal technique. He sings to communicate human emotion in its rawest, most honest form. His screams are anguish. His grunts are joy. His wandering pitch is the sound of someone feeling something so deeply that perfect notes become irrelevant. I spent 4 years at Juilliard learning to analyze music, and it took James Brown 15 minutes to teach me that analysis isn't the same as understanding. The review continued for 2,000 words, describing Morrison's experience on stage, the moment he finally let himself feel the music instead of critiquing it, and the realization that he'd been writing about music for 5 years without actually understanding what music was for. The piece went viral. As much as something could go viral in 1967, it was reprinted in newspapers across the country. Morrison received hundreds of letters, some calling him a sellout who'd been intimidated into changing his opinion, others thanking him for articulating something they'd always felt but couldn't express. A month later, Morrison received a package with no return address. Inside was a vinyl copy of "It's a Man's World," with a note attached in handwriting he recognized from Brown's autograph. "For when you forget to feel, J.B. Morrison kept that record for the rest of his life. He went on to become one of the most respected music critics in America, known not for technical analysis, but for his ability to capture the emotional truth of a performance. He wrote extensively about soul, R&B, and later hip-hop genres that prioritized feeling over technical perfection. In every piece he wrote, you could see the influence of that night at the Apollo. He never forgot what James Brown had taught him, that the purpose of music isn't to be perfect, it's to be true. When James Brown died in 2006, Morrison wrote a tribute that began, "James Brown once humiliated me in front of 5,000 people, and it was the greatest gift anyone ever gave me. He taught me that there's a difference between being right and understanding truth. I spent years being right about music. He taught me how to understand it." The story of the critic who learned to feel became part of James Brown's legend. It wasn't just about putting a critic in his place. It was about teaching him something valuable. Brown could have simply embarrassed Morrison and sent him away. Instead, he gave him a lesson that changed his life, and through Morrison's subsequent writing, influenced how thousands of people thought about music. That's what real teachers do. They don't just prove you wrong, they show you a better way to be right. If this story of humility, transformation, and learning to feel, instead of just analyze, moved you, share it with someone who needs to remember that the head and the heart both matter. Subscribe for more true stories about legends who taught life-changing lessons, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a moment when analysis met truth, and truth won.